these town halls are an opportunity for Democrats and even agitators, some might say, to really make their voices known because they are frustrated. The Democrats were really given, well, they were thrashed in the election, and there's no looking at the future of the party, especially at presidential level, there's not really much hope and there's not really much direction. And so this is their outlet. This is their way of saying, look, we're not happy with what's going on. And if they take that out of the Republicans, then that's the issue for the Republicans. One of the questions going in the future is whether Democrats are really going to take advantage of this, because these recent town halls have made it into the headlines. And as we go closer onto the midterms, the more of these videos that come out and the more videos there are of Republicans being heckled at town halls, which are, at the end of the day, their own events, then could reflect badly on Republicans and show that there is growing anger against Republicans. And that's nothing to do with policy. That's very much to do with image.
I just want to tell our viewers that we are watching President Trump in Washington. He is expected to be signing another executive order related to the Olympics in America, and we'll drop in on that in just a few moments. But in the meantime, Annika, to come back to you and talk about how Republicans have been reacting on the ground to what they've seen over the first 6 to 8 months of Trump's second term in office. I mean, can we read anything into the fact that not many people have turned up for these town halls? I mean, it's a pretty small sample size, but when elections are really hinged on the fact that, which party can turn out their base more, is there something that Republicans need to be worried about?
I think there's a really good point that was made in a New York Times article about these town halls, and that was every district is unique. Every state, every district, and each member has to know their own district. Some districts are large, and the people are spread out. It's fairly rural. So if you have a town hall there, you're not going to get a lot of turnout. Some of them are more dense. Although, typically speaking, urban areas tend to lean more for Democratic candidates and representatives. So I think that having been given the guidance by their leadership that they don't necessarily need to go in person to town halls, and that there may be security issues or a hard time screening questions, maybe do electronic events, I do respect the members like Representative Mike Flood, who went in person and sort of brooked the ire of the voters who supported him, and maybe some who didn't, and wasn't afraid to defend his vote for the One Big Beautiful Bill or any of the other policies.
All right, Annika Wills, we're going to listen now to the UN Security Council, I believe, because the U.S. is speaking. The Representative Dorothy Shea. Let's listen in there.
Story. The pain and grief that you and other families of hostages have faced at the hands of Hamas is unfathomable. And the United States stands with you and will continue to work to free all of the remaining hostages, living and deceased. Colleagues, the horrific videos of hostages, Evyatar David and Rom Braslevsky, filmed by the terrorist groups Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, should shock and appall the world. The footage of these two young men, tormented, starved, emaciated, is not only a reminder of the evil that Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad represent, it also makes more clear than ever that the Security Council and the international community must stop pressuring Israel and instead impose maximum pressure on Hamas to immediately release all 50 hostages that they continue to hold captive. The hostages abducted on October 7th have now suffered for 668 days. These videos show Evyatar David, a 24-year-old kidnapped by Hamas from the Nova Music Festival, with an appearance his own family described as a living skeleton buried alive, being forced by his terrorist captors to dig his own grave. Rom Braslevsky, a 21-year-old abducted from the Nova Festival, is pictured in similarly dire conditions. The United States has made clear that freeing the hostages is our priority, along with ensuring Hamas disarms and no longer rules Gaza. President Trump, Special Envoy Witkoff, and Secretary Rubio continue to work tirelessly to end the war, release the hostages, including Itai Chen and Omer Nutra, the two Americans still held by Hamas, and bring peace to Gaza and give it a future free of Hamas. As President Trump said last week, the fastest way to end the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is for Hamas to surrender and release the hostages. Yet Hamas has refused to do so. While Israel has accepted the terms of the ceasefire proposal, Hamas has consistently rejected them. That is emblematic of the bad faith we see from Hamas. Unfortunately, at a time when pressure on Hamas is more necessary than ever to free the hostages and end the war, some have instead taken steps that embolden Hamas and undermine the negotiators' efforts. We must be clear that unproductive publicity stunts like last week's two-state solution conference and unilateral announcements regarding recognition of a Palestinian state undercut the efforts of mediators and prolong the war. These gifts to Hamas not only imperil the hostages, they also hurt the civilians of Gaza, who continue to suffer what President Trump has recognized as real starvation. Colleagues, no one wants to see Palestinians, civilians in Gaza go hungry and thirsty. The United States supports getting assistance to civilians in Gaza and has been actively working to support the secure delivery of humanitarian aid to civilians in Gaza. As President Trump has said, the United States is going to be even more involved in these efforts. On Friday, Special Envoy Witkoff and Ambassador Huckabee traveled to Gaza, where they met with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and other agencies and visited GHF aid distribution sites. The GHF recently announced reaching the milestone of delivering more than 100 million meals directly to civilians in Gaza. On Sunday alone, the GHF reported delivering more than 1.5 million meals at its distribution sites. We recognize the important actions Israel has taken to facilitate the increased flow of aid into Gaza. Those who have professed concern about the reported risk of famine should join the United States in supporting the GHF's work in securely delivering food to civilians in Gaza. It is essential that our humanitarian response help those civilians without benefiting Hamas. Mr. President, countries, including the members of this Council, face a choice: whether to continue with actions that reward and encourage Hamas, or whether to hold the terrorist organization responsible for its actions. We should all be able to agree that the hostages must be freed without further delay, and that Hamas can no longer rule Gaza and must disarm. The hostages must be returned home, and Palestinians in Gaza must be allowed to begin a new chapter free of Hamas. President, we have once again heard members here make allegations of genocide. These allegations are politically motivated and categorically false. They are part of a deliberate, cynical propaganda campaign as Hamas attempts to win symbolic victories to compensate for total defeat in war. The United States refutes these allegations entirely. The United States fully supports Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas's terrorism. Israel has taken numerous measures to limit harm to civilians and to address humanitarian needs. The loss of civilian life in Gaza is tragic, but the responsibility for this rests with Hamas, which could stop the fighting today by agreeing to the ceasefire already accepted by Israel. And with respect to recent reports of deaths of Palestinians near GHF aid distribution sites, I would say that the GHF has stated that recent reports of deaths near their distribution sites are false. The most recent tragedy occurred near UN convoys after they passed through the Zikim crossing. The UN continues to turn down the GHF's offers to collaborate and coordinate efforts. We mourn the loss of all innocent lives and agree that more assistance needs to safely reach those in need. And we encourage all to support the GHF's efforts. President, in closing, the United States calls upon all countries to join together and say with one clear voice that Hamas must immediately surrender, release all the hostages, both those living and those who have already been murdered at the hands of Hamas, and allow this war to end. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement.
Okay, that was the UN representative, the U.S. representative to the UN, Dorothy Shea, speaking there. We'll continue to keep an eye on that. We do want to speak to you about another story we've been covering over the last day or two here on The Context, which is what is happening with the redistricting battle in Texas. President Trump today defending his push for a Republican-backed plan to redraw Texas congressional districts before next year's midterm elections that would benefit the Republicans. Remember that Democrats, many Texas Democrats, have fled the state. We can speak now to Gene Wu, Representative Gene Wu. He's the minority House leader. Representative, it's very good to have you with us on BBC News. Thanks for your patience staying with us. Wondering what you and Democrats plan to do there in Illinois. Do you plan to stay a longer period of time? What is your strategy?
So, we're here because there are simply no other options, because we've tried every tact to get Republicans to do what they promised that they would do, which is work on the disaster preparation for the Kerrville disaster, and also to help make sure that we prevent future disasters. They've not even had a single hearing. They've not even filed a bill on that when we broke quorum on Monday. In Chicago, we're here in Chicago to try to stop this corruption, to put an end to it, and hopefully to get the public to be aware of this corruption that is happening in their system and how their leaders, the Republicans who have controlled the state for 30 years, completely ignore their pleas, ignore everything that they want, and they keep getting away with it.
Representative Wu, you know that Republicans in the state have said you're running away from your duties in Texas. I know that you and your delegation say that's simply not the case. Do you think your constituents in Texas agree with what you've done?
So, we had a quorum break in 2021, and during that time, probably 85–90% of the messages that came in were pretty negative, were pretty against us. This time, because today is a completely different world. What Donald Trump has done to this country is dreadful, and people recognize that. And now, the messages coming in are 99-1 in support. Right? A complete flip. Our country is now different. The world is different. And what we're saying to everyone is, we're buying you time. Democrats in Texas are buying you time to wake up and stand up and get ready to fight.
Okay, Representative Wu, just one more question before we let you go. Do you think Democrats should be fighting fire with fire, redistricting in states like California, Illinois?
Look, we don't want to. And those governors and those states have said, we don't want to do this because mid-decade redistricting is unethical, it's undemocratic, we should not be doing it. But if the other side launches nukes, the only way we can stop them from launching more is to say we will respond and respond in force. I think everyone who's lived through the Cold War has realized that look, the moment you tell the other side that we will no longer respond to your violence, to your threats, is the day that they do it even more. So the only way that we can stop this is to say, if you do any more, we will do the same.
All right, the top Democrat in Texas' State House, Minority Leader Gene Wu, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you to the panel, Annika Green, Wills Robinson. I have to say goodbye to you now as I prepare for World News America coming up next for our global viewers.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sumi. We're going to stay here with more on Context USA, though, and we're listening to President Trump answering questions after signing his latest executive order. Here he is.
Of distribution and also money. We also have the Arab states are going to help us with that in terms of the money and possibly distribution. So that's what I'm focused on. As far as the rest of it, I really can't say. That's going to be pretty much up to Israel. Yeah, please. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. On transgender athletes in the Olympics, back to the safety, especially of female combat boxers, will the Department of Justice considering pressing charges against any man that tries to masquerade as a woman coming into this country to beat up American athletes? And secondly, would your administration consider genetic testing so that these people can prove that they're actually women competing?
Well, I think there is going to be a very strong form of testing. As far as charges, I'd have to ask the Attorney General about that. I don't know. But there will be a very, very strong form of testing. And if the test doesn't come out appropriately, they won't be in the Olympics. Yes, ma'am, please. Go ahead, please. White.
Thank you. Mr. President, do you believe that the U.S. committee would have made this decision on men and women's sports if you weren't president? And do you believe that this decision will stay in place once you are no longer president?
I think they probably would have, because it just seems to be an issue that most people feel should be. I can't really say. I'd have to. You could have asked Chairman Wasserman, but I would say that there's a possibility. It could go either way if you really want to know the truth. I feel strongly about it. I ran a campaign, at least partially, on that. That was one of the many issues that I talked about: open borders, the economy, taxes, all of the things. But that was certainly one of the issues. So I really can't. I really don't know. Could have gone either way. Please.
Have you decided on a replacement for the Fed governor?
For Fed governor, I'll be making that decision before the end of the week, and we'll either decide on one for permanence or the 4-month period, the term. There's a term of about a number of months. We have a couple of candidates. Everybody wants it, okay? It's not a couple.
U.S. President Donald Trump there in Washington speaking to the media. A wide range of questions coming towards him. The latest one asking about the Fed governor and what he intends to do with him. We might hear by the end of the week. Something we'll be watching closely here on BBC News. Do stay with us. Bye for now.
I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington, and this is BBC World News America. Internal division in Israel. Families of hostages and Israeli officials push back against Prime Minister Netanyahu's reported plans to fully occupy Gaza. After Texas Republicans set out plans to redraw congressional districts in their favor, Democrats say they're considering retaliating by redistricting to their advantage. And a damning report into the implosion of the Titan submersible, which killed all 5 people on board. Welcome to World News America. The United Nations says it is deeply alarmed by reports that Israel plans to expand its military operations throughout the Gaza Strip. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu could seek approval for a proposal to fully occupy the territory at a meeting of his security cabinet on Thursday. That is according to local media. This despite pushback within Israel from top security officials, including the chief of general staff of the army. Israel says it already controls 75% of Gaza. The red you see on the map of Gaza shows the areas that the IDF currently control. Under Prime Minister Netanyahu's reported plan, the IDF would fully move into populated areas, raising concerns for Gaza's 2 million residents. Our correspondent Hugo Bachega has more from Jerusalem.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a meeting with senior security officials, and there have been reports in Israeli media suggesting a tense exchange between the Prime Minister and the Chief of Staff of the military, who is against the idea of expanding military operations in Gaza and also the idea of fully occupying Gaza. Apparently, he told the Prime Minister that this would be a trap and that this would endanger the lives of the hostages who remain in captivity in Gaza. And this is very much the position of the families of the hostages. They say that any expansion of activities in Gaza would mean that the military would enter parts of Gaza where the hostages are believed to be held, and that this would put their lives at risk. Now, the Prime Minister has been accused by his critics of prolonging the conflict for political purposes to guarantee the survival of his governing coalition. He's obviously supported by ultranationalist ministers who have been threatening to quit his government if there is any kind of deal with Hamas, if the war ends. They've been talking about expelling Palestinians from Gaza and also resettling it with Jews. So any kind of expansion of military activity in Gaza would also raise concerns about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and is likely to be criticized by some of Israel's allies who have been urging the government to strike a deal with Hamas for the release of the hostages and to end the war in Gaza.
As Hugo said, Israeli hostages, families of the hostages, fear that the Prime Minister's plans could endanger their loved ones in Gaza. On Tuesday, the UN Security Council met at Israel's request to discuss the plight of those hostages in Gaza after Hamas published videos of hostages Eviatar David and Rom Braslavsky in captivity. These are photos of them before they were abducted on October 7th, and this is their current condition in the latest images released under duress by Hamas. They're among 50 hostages still held in Gaza and among only 20 believed to still be alive. Eviatar David's brother testifying to the UN, describing his family's reaction to what is now the second hostage video of his brother. The first was back in February.
My little brother was forced to speak to the world and then actively began to dig his own grave inside a filthy, dark tunnel in Gaza. My mother and I could not even bring ourselves to watch it. We knew that if we did, we would be unable to function. My father and sister, however, felt they had to see him, to hear his voice, to feel him somehow. Now those images haunt them. My father cannot sleep, and my mother has not stopped crying ever since.
Meanwhile, Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry reports at least 26 people were killed in Israeli strikes and gunfire, including 5 sheltering in a tent in the Mawasi area of Khan Yunis. And even though more aid is entering the territory, aid groups say it is still not enough to stave off widespread starvation. In Gaza City, this 12-year-old, Fadi, is suffering from severe malnutrition. 7-year-old May is receiving intensive treatment in the hospital. According to the charity Save the Children, 70,000 children under 5 years are currently malnourished in Gaza. Now, Axios, the news site, is reporting that the Trump administration plans to, quote, take over management of the humanitarian effort in Gaza because, according to an administration official, Israel is not handling it adequately. Let's get more on the situation now. I'm joined in studio here with me, Fabrizio Carboni. He is the head of regional delegation to the U.S. and Canada at the International Committee of the Red Cross. Fabrizio, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. And I want to talk to you both about the plight of Palestinians in Gaza and the hostages, as we've seen those horrible videos that were released. First of all, if we look at the situation, trying to get aid to Gazans right now who are suffering from hunger, starvation, how at all can they access aid right now? Can you describe to us from your colleagues on the ground what they say about what the situation looks like?
I think what we need to understand is that Gaza is not a safe place. I mean, many humanitarian organizations, while moving in Gaza, had serious security incidents. I had colleagues who were killed. We had several colleagues wounded. So Gaza is a very dangerous place, obviously, for the Gazan population, for the hostages, and for the humanitarian actors to do their work. So there is an issue around the quantity of assistance going in. Today there is a lot of focus on food, but if you don't have water, if you don't have fuel to cook, you have what we see in our hospital, people burning plastic, people burning trash, and having lung infection, and then going to our hospital.
We just mentioned that there is reporting that the Trump administration has said it could possibly look at taking over aid distribution because, according to one official, Israel has not handled it adequately. Would that be a good solution from the Red Cross's perspective?
Look, it's difficult to comment. I mean, something I didn't verify in a soundbite. I would say today there are systems in place in the private sector, in the humanitarian sector, ready to deliver at scale what's needed in Gaza. And what is needed is a coordination mechanism and an agreement that today humanitarian assistance for the people of Gaza needs to be central and not be a political or a security bargaining chip.
Yeah. Your organization has also been speaking about the hostages that are being held by Hamas in Gaza. In fact, the Red Cross has offered itself continuously as an intermediary, a humanitarian intermediary. Has Hamas ever responded to those offers?
I think we had statement from Hamas, floating the possibility of the ICRC visiting hostages. They put condition, asking for humanitarian corridor. I think our response is, one, we are ready. We've always been ready, and we taking security risk in Gaza that we don't take in any other place around the world, just to be there when it happens. The second is that we should stop conditioning assistance to hostages, assistance to wounded, assistance to kids in Gaza, to other political security conditions. This access should be unimpeded, unrestricted. Today, the hostages in Gaza need an urgent assistance. They need first to be freed because there is no reason to have hostages. That's the starting point. And two, it's time for the parties to this conflict to be serious and give us access. And the same goes for the civilian population in Gaza.
I do want to ask you, one of your colleagues on the ground was killed just in the last few days. He works for the Palestinian Red Crescent. Israel has said it will look into this. Have they given a response as to what happened?
Not to my knowledge, but probably the answer will come. But again, I don't see an answer which could justify the number of Palestinian Red Crescent volunteers killed, ICRC killed, humanitarian actors killed. I think it's really time to put an end to this dramatic humanitarian situation. I think all actors are asking for at least a ceasefire at least a ceasefire, and then to give some light to the people of Gaza. I mean, to the Israeli people too, to the families of hostages. This permanent state of torture need to stop.
We'll have to leave it there for today, but Fabrizio Carboni, the head of the regional delegation to the U.S. and Canada at the International Committee of the Red Cross, thank you very much for joining us today. Okay, we're going to move on to some other news now. President Trump and President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine spoke by phone on Tuesday, and the Ukrainian president says the two had productive talks aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. President Zelensky wrote on X, quote, "We exchanged assessments of the situation. The Russians have intensified the brutality of their attacks. We spoke, of course, about sanctions against Russia. Quote, their economy continues to decline, and that's exactly why Moscow is so sensitive to this prospect and President Trump's resolve." President Trump's and President Zelensky's call comes a day before White House envoy Steve Witkoff travels to Moscow for a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. And the BBC's Bernd Busman is at the White House covering this. He joins us for more. Bernd, very good to see you. What more is the White House saying about that call with President Zelensky and Steve Witkoff heading to Moscow to meet with Russian leaders?
Well, there's been very little clarity, at least from the White House's perspective, about what exactly was discussed on the phone call with Zelensky and what exactly Steve Witkoff is planning to do in Russia. It's very unclear what happens when this deadline that President Trump set expires on Friday. He had previously suggested that there could be tariffs or secondary tariffs, but we haven't really seen any sort of firm plan from the White House. And even President Trump himself has, just recently in the last few days, said that the Russians have proven very good at evading sanctions. So we still don't have a particularly good idea about what exactly this is going to accomplish. But just a few minutes ago, President Trump was asked about this at an event he's attending right now. And he said that they're trying very, very hard to stop the fighting. And his focus is that on bringing this conflict to a ceasefire.
Yeah, a critical week, isn't it, Bernd, especially with that deadline nearing at the end of the week for some sort of ceasefire agreement with Russia. I want to ask you also, as we've been talking about Gaza on the program, about what the president's position has been there. We have seen some reporting that he has talked about taking over Gaza, also aid distribution. What more can you tell us?
Well, just a few days ago, the president was asked similarly about this issue, and he seemed, if this reporting turns out to be accurate, there seems to have been a shift in tone, because just a few days ago, he did say that Israel was looking to run these humanitarian and food distribution, and he seemed quite supportive of that. He was just asked about Gaza at the same event here at the White House just a short while ago. And he said that his main priority is getting food to the people of Gaza, as well as bringing the hostages back. But he also did say that he was asked specifically about reports that Prime Minister Netanyahu plans to expand military operations in Gaza. And he said that's essentially Israel's decision and that he leaves that to them.
All right, Bernd Busman for us at the White House. As always, thank you very much. Leaders in the Democratic Party say they're considering redrawing congressional maps to their advantage in Democrat-led states like California, Illinois, New York. They say it is in retaliation for a Republican redistricting plan in Texas. There has been a political standoff there after the Republican-led Texas legislature suggested congressional boundaries that could flip 5 seats in Congress, giving Republicans a majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. Texas Republicans voted on Monday to arrest more than 50 Democrats who fled the state in a bid to block the plan. President Trump demanded Republicans redistrict the state ahead of those midterms next year.
We have an opportunity in Texas to pick up 5 seats. We have a really good governor, and we have good people in Texas. And I won Texas. I got the highest vote in the history of Texas, as you probably know. And we are entitled to 5 more seats.
I don't.
Okay, that's President Trump's view there. Earlier, I spoke to the top Democrat in Texas's State House, Minority Leader Gene Wu. He fled the state as part of a bid, as we said, to block this new redistricting. I asked him how long he plans to stay in Illinois.
So, we're here because there are simply no other options, because we've tried every tact to get Republicans to do what they promised that they would do, which is work on the disaster preparation for the Kerrville disaster, and also to help make sure that we prevent future disasters. They've not even had a single hearing. They've not even filed a bill on that when we broke quorum on Monday. in Chicago, we're here in Chicago to try to stop this corruption, to put an end to it, and hopefully to get the public to be aware of this corruption that is happening in their system and how their leaders, the Republicans who have controlled the state for 30 years, completely ignore their pleas, ignore everything that they want, and they keep getting away with it.
Representative Wu, you know that Republicans in the state have said you're running away from your duties in Texas. I know that you and your delegation say that's simply not the case. Do you think your constituents in Texas agree with what you've done?
So, we had a quorum break in 2021, and during that time, like probably 85–90% of the messages that came in were pretty negative, were pretty against us. This time, because today is a completely different world. What Donald Trump has done to this country is dreadful, and people recognize that. And now, the messages coming in are 99-1 in support, right? A complete flip. Our country is now different. The world is different. And what we're saying to everyone is, we're buying you time. Democrats in Texas are buying you time to wake up and stand up and getting ready to fight.
Okay, to some other news now, and OceanGate, the company behind the fatal submersible expedition to the wreck of the Titanic, is being heavily criticized by the U.S. Coast Guard Marine Board of Investigation in a damning report. All 5 people on board the Titan sub died when the vessel imploded on a deep-sea dive in June 2023, including British explorer Hamish Harding. The report found that OceanGate's failure to follow established engineering protocols for safety, testing, and maintenance of their submersible was the primary cause of the disaster. Our science editor, Rebecca Morrell, has more.
Lying 3,800 metres down at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, crushed and mangled, the wreckage of the Titan submersible. But a report now says this disaster could have been prevented. 5 people on board died: Hamish Harding, 19-year-old Suleiman Dawood and his father Shahzada Dawood, Titanic expert P.H. Nargiole, and Stockton Rush, OceanGate CEO. This footage records the moment the sub was lost. Stockton Rush's wife Wendy is waiting for messages from Titan as it nears the sea floor. What was that bang? She says, "What was that bang?" She didn't realise at the time, but it was the sound of Titan imploding. The US Coast Guard's report has placed much of the blame with Stockton Rush.
I think the entire operation was deeply flawed. Your primary operator, your CEO, was also filling the role of safety officer, lead engineer at the end. And it's just too many, it's a consolidation of power that leads to no checks and balances.
The 2-year investigation concludes that OceanGate had critically flawed safety practices and a toxic workplace culture. The report said Stockton Rush misrepresented Titan as indestructible, where in fact the submersible was anything but. Titan had an unconventional design. This is a full-scale model. The passengers were here in the hull, made from carbon fibre, a material that had never been used for a sub carrying people. The carbon fibre was built up layer by layer until it was 5 inches, 13 centimetres thick. But these layers can come apart, a known problem called delamination. The wreckage of the hull clearly shows the material had separated. You can see the gaps. The part of the sub meant to keep the passengers safe had failed catastrophically. The Coast Guard says Titan's hull was damaged on a dive the year before the disaster, but the sub wasn't properly maintained and not adequately checked.
So you can't expect to take a vehicle to the same depth every time, knowing that it's weaker than the dive before, and expect it not to fail at some stage. If you keep diving a weakening hull to the same depth, it is a mathematical certainty that it will fail. The tragedy is you don't know when it's going to fail.
David Lockridge was OceanGate's former director of marine operations. He had serious concerns about the sub, but was fired after raising them. He tried to alert the US authorities in 2018. The report says it was a missed opportunity to prevent the disaster.
It didn't need to happen. I always hoped that what happened wouldn't happen, but in the back of my mind, I just knew if they just kept carrying on the way they were going, and with that deficient equipment, then there would be an incident.
The family of Suleiman and Shahzada Dawood are hoping something positive will come out of the tragedy. They said unregulated behaviour, a lack of accountability and a fundamentally flawed design cost the lives of all on board, including our beloved Shahzada and Suleiman. We hope this tragedy serves as a turning point that drives meaningful reform, rigorous safety standards and effective oversight within the submersible industry. The US Coast Guard says Stockton Rush could have faced criminal charges had he survived. A civil lawsuit against OceanGate has already been filed. The ripples of this tragedy are likely to continue for years to come. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News.
Now, the social media platform WhatsApp says it's ramping up its fight against criminal scam networks, many of which are tied to organized crime and forced labor in Southeast Asia. The company says it took down 6.8 million accounts in just 6 months and helped disrupt a global scam ring, which used everything from ChatGPT to TikTok to trick people into fake crypto investments. Now, the app is rolling out new tools aimed at helping users recognize and avoid scams before it's too late. For more, I spoke to Claire Deevy, WhatsApp's Director of External Affairs.
So when you think of WhatsApp, we are an end-to-end encrypted platform that is servicing people around the globe. And what we see is these scammers are getting increasingly more sophisticated. They are reaching out across many platforms. And what we want to do is, first of all, share and how industry is working together and we can disrupt this. And second, what WhatsApp is doing inside our product to help protect people. So what we've seen is, in many cases, scammers may try and add people to groups. So we are launching a group safety feature, which if you're added to a group by someone who's not in your contact list and you don't recognize the group, we're going to give you a card that sits over the group and gives you information like when the group was created, if you have any contacts in common, and some safety features. Now, this means that you'll be able to verify and think about, is this a group I want to join? And if it's not, you can block and report straight away.
Okay. You know, I was looking at the Global Anti-Scam Alliance, which I know Meta is actually part of. It reported in 2024 that scammers stole $1.03 trillion globally. So that is really significant. Of course, it's not just WhatsApp, it's across platforms, you know, Gmail, so on and so forth. But what do you think has made WhatsApp in particular susceptible to scams?
I think the Global Anti-Scams Alliance is a fantastic example of how industry, NGOs, experts are able to come together and share trends, share insights with each other to help catch these scammers. So what we see as they're so sophisticated is they will often start on one platform. Now, this could be an SMS, it could be an email, it could even be a dating app. And they're trying to cycle people. They'll then ask you to reach out via WhatsApp, via Telegram, and usually they will end up somewhere around an investment or some kind of crypto place that asks you to upload money. Now, what these scammers are trying to do with that is they are trying to evade detection, so each of us only have a small piece of the puzzle. So working through things like the Global Anti-Scam Alliance, we're able to put those pieces together and have impact, like how WhatsApp was able to take down these 6.8 million accounts in the first half of the year linked to scam centers.
I guess what I'm wondering, Claire, is there a specific aspect or feature of WhatsApp that has made it susceptible to scams? And is there something that you have looked at there as well to address with this service in particular?
I think all of us that are working in the tech sector are trying to work out what we can do with scams. These scammers are completely opportunistic. They will use anything they can. What we see is they are often running multiple scams at once. So it's not just one type. Right. It could be pyramid investment scheme, and they're cycling from one piece to another. That's why it's so important we have to work together.
Yeah, that's an important point, isn't it? So one question people might be wondering is, why are our phone numbers circulating so freely that scammers can access them?
So when we think about phone numbers or email, any of those are open for people to contact. So at WhatsApp, we're looking at this in two ways. Firstly, we have put lots of features for our users to protect their privacy. So we're an end-to-end encrypted product. The messages are private, but you also have settings like silencing unknown callers. This means someone who's not in your contact list calls you, you won't be notified and hear the call. You can set your group settings so people can't add you to groups. And what we're trying to do is give you that extra layer of privacy in the product. In addition to that, we're working behind the scenes looking for behaviors or indications. We're working with the user reports we get to try and take action on these scam centers.
We do know that WhatsApp is end-to-end encrypted. That's part of the important privacy feature, of course. But metadata is collected. You know, if we look at the U.S. in particular, would federal privacy regulation, for example, prevent some of these phone numbers from being accessed by scammers?
So exactly right. I think end-to-end encryption is really important, and that means no one, not even WhatsApp, can see the content of your messages. I think what we can do as WhatsApp and those in the tech industry is, first of all, how do we make our product as strong as possible? How do we put the user settings in to protect the privacy? The second thing we can do is provide education and context, like these new cards that we have. We're also looking at ways to give people a context card when you reach out to a sender who's not in your contact list, because we've seen that evolve too. And thirdly, education. So things like helping people understand if something seems too good to be true, take a minute, pause. You don't have to respond straight away.
All right, that is our program for today. Thank you so much for watching World News America, and do stay with BBC News.